Welcome to the VTC's Introduction to Linux Security course. My name is Brad Causey, and I'll be working alongside Bobby Rogers as the content and course developer to produce this title to enlighten you on the basics of Linux security as it applies to the overall insecurity in today's networks. So right off the bat, we're going to briefly go through a course outline and discuss some of the things that we're going to get into more detail about as we move through this title. First of all, we're going to go through a brief introduction to what is Linux security. We're going to get a description of this and maybe learn a few things about Linux itself, what security problems plague today's networks, and do some comparisons on the security of different operating systems. Next, we're going to take the first logical step. We're going to go through a Linux installation from start to finish and discuss what options pertain to the overall security of the system. So we're going to get a good handle on what choices need to be made, and then we'll go through a fairly lengthy demonstration. Next, we'll talk about the boot process. A system is at its weakest during the boot up process, so we want to make sure that we take the appropriate measures so that we can lock the system down well enough that even when it's booting up, it's well protected. Next, we'll talk about user accounts and groups. Users are our number one threat, so we definitely want to address those and come up with different ways that we can take and approach the security of the users and how they're treated on the system. Directly in line with how we treat our users falls the category of file system security and permissions. So it's absolutely critical that we're able to protect the data stored on our systems by paying close attention to permissions and even additional specialized pieces that fall under that category. Then we'll talk about data encryption, basically taking the next step beyond permissions to protect our data while it's in storage on a system. Then we'll get into hardening the operating system itself. We'll talk about a lot of the tools that are available out there, as well as where the many security pitfalls exist in a Linux operating system. Then we'll talk about Linux firewalls. Linux has become renowned for being a fantastic firewall, but problems can arise when you're using the Linux system for things other than a simple firewall. So we really want to find the best of both worlds, and this is where we're going to discuss those options. Then we'll talk about the various Linux security mechanisms that exist for use in today's environments. We'll talk about a lot of host security options and get into some good detail on things that we should have on our system and things that we definitely shouldn't. Then we'll talk about secure networking. We'll go into some detail over some very common daemons that run on Linux systems and try to understand why they're secure or why they're not and what we can do to mitigate those risks. Next, we'll talk about detecting and stopping Linux attacks. So we're going to go into some detail on what we need to do on the system to both stop the attacks and detect them when they're in progress. Understanding this little bit of information can mean the difference in a successful prosecution and even the success of stopping the attacker altogether. Finally, we'll talk about the best security practices, and this is basically going to be a checklist of things that are very important to know and things to pay special attention to when configuring your system. And finally, we'll take a brief look at the authors that work with VTC to bring you this course.